Thank you so much to everyone who's come for attending this, which is our the first in what we hope will become a series of live online lectures that we're calling An Evening with Archaeopress. For any of you who don't know us, Archaeopress are an independent publisher. We're based in Summertown, which is in North Oxford, and we specialise in books about archaeology and related heritage topics. We've worked with Caroline on a couple of projects now over the last couple of years. I'm going to wave them at you now. This was the first. This is Culture and Society at Lullingstone Roman Villa, which is, of course, what we're here to talk about this evening. And more recently, Caroline's done this lovely Latin lexicon, which is both a wonderful study guide if you're learning Latin, but it's also wonderful if you are interested in languages more generally, or word games and the like. And it's got these beautiful illustrations from Amanda Short. I don't know how well that will come across over Zoom, but they're packed with very interesting and creative details. So we're very pleased to work with Caroline on her books. The lecture, it will last roughly 45 to 50 minutes, and it will be followed by a short Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Caroline on. Caroline, over to you.
Hello, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Patrick, for a very kind introduction, and it's lovely to be here. And thank you to everyone at Archaeopress for all their hard work, but particularly Patrick in getting this evening set up. We're really excited to be kicking off the series. But of course, also a huge welcome to all of you who have joined us. I was going to say this evening, I think some of you, it may be lunchtime or even morning, so a huge welcome to all of you, wherever you are. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you this evening and hopefully hearing some questions and thoughts and comments from all of you about Lullingstone Roman Villa. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So if you'll just bear with me while I get it set up. Well, of course, it's been a very challenging year all round, hasn't it? And one of the things that I know we've all really missed is being able to go out, visit our friends or family at their homes. And so what I would like to do with you this evening is to take you on a little visit to somebody's home. Because first and foremost, Lullingstone Roman Villa was somebody's home. We don't, unfortunately, know whose home. There has been some speculation amongst academics, and we may talk about that later. So I can't give you a name or really much about the identity. But what I can tell you is that we're in for a treat, because this person, whoever he was, probably a he, was a very good host by all accounts. So I think we're going to get a very warm welcome in the villa this evening. And in order to go on this virtual visit, we need to cast our minds back, because I'd like to take you there in around AD 350. The reason for that will become clear as we go to the villa and have a look inside. And of course, even as today, I think we can all learn quite a lot about an individual by their house, the way they've decorated it, the way they present it, as I say, the sort of welcome that they give you when you visit. Although we do not know this person's name, I think you'll agree, I hope you will agree by the end of this visit, which will last about 45 minutes, that we can work out quite a lot about this person, their likes, their aspirations, their hopes, possibly some of their fears, but certainly we can get as much of their identity as possible from what we're about to see. Now, on this first slide, this, of course, is the villa itself, and I wanted to show you the setting of the villa just to give you an idea of where we're going. And this, of course, is an artist's impression, but I think a really beautiful one, and gives you a nice idea of the landscape setting. But I'm also going to show you, before we go, the map, so you can actually locate exactly where it is. So this is a map of North Kent in the Roman period, and if you can follow the pointer with me, this is Richborough. This is where the Romans landed in AD 43. And you can see that they were very keen to get to what they called Londinium, London, of course, right by the Thames estuary. And this lovely straight road that they built, called Watling Street, is actually today still in existence and is our A2. Now, there are about 60 villas that we know of or have been excavated at some point in Kent. You can see there are really three clusters. Here's the first one along Watling Street. Here's the second one down the Medway Valley. And then the third one, which is the one that really interests us this evening, is the Darrant Valley. And here's Lullingstone just in the middle. And interestingly, I don't unfortunately probably have time to go into all the details of the excavation of Lullingstone, although it is a fascinating story. I feel sure if it had been written, it could have been the dig that we've just seen. And many of the original excavators are still alive and have shared with me some of their fascinating stories about it. But I think my favourite one is the fact that Lullingstone had not been discovered, but the local archaeology group worked out that there were villas along the Darrant Valley every 2 or 3 miles, but there was a gap where Lullingstone is. So they went digging, just literally with a little trowel, having a look under the weeds. They started to find some Roman broken tiles, some coins, and thus originally, I think the very first hint of it was in the 1700s when they were building the deer park fence. And unfortunately, they damaged one of the mosaics, which we'll see in the pictures later. That was the first hint, but the excavations didn't actually start properly. Well, there were some in 1939, but they were then halted by the Second World War, but then properly with earnest in 1949. And indeed, all their hard work is really, you know, it's thanks to all of them that we can enjoy this amazing villa and the remains of it today. So let's go back to the landscape. As you can see, it is a beautiful setting, and in many ways, the setting is very similar even today, and I know that some of you will have already visited Lullingstone, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's a real joy of a day out, and I would dedicate a whole day to being there. There is much greenery, the river, this is the River Darrant that we noticed, going all the way up to London. Beautiful lush pasture land, and this was perfect for whoever lived here. At the time we're going to visit them, because of course they were farming. So they had rich, fertile pasture land for their cows, for their sheep, perfect also for growing crops. All this woodland area behind the villa would have been perfect for timber, for building and for fuel purposes, not to mention the river supplying water for drinking, for bathing and for the animals. Now, although we're going in about AD 350, I just want to give you a little bit of the history of the building that was on the site before then. And this is really how it all started. We believe there was settlement in this area in about AD 50, but the first proper villa appeared in about AD 90 to 100, and that's what you can see here. Quite a simple building. It's called a winged corridor structure because the 2 corridors either end do give it the appearance of having wings, nice and symmetrical. And this is the first structure, remains of which are still on site today. Now, we're going to fast forward a little bit because the next set of sort of refurbishment, as it were, happened in about 180 AD. And the key thing that happened then was that the owner decided to add a bath suite. Now, the bath suite was built here, and you can just see in this artist's impression that this is on quite a steep slope, not only going up behind the villa, but also the riverbank slopes down a little bit. And they were very clever because what they did was they used this to their benefit. So if I just go to the next slide, which shows you, this is actually the baths when they'd had a second refurbishment. So this was their extended version. And you can see how they had an aqueduct bringing water from the river. And here, as if we've just sort of cut through the walls for this picture just to show you, I think there's someone having a little swim around in the cold plunge bath there. And baths, of course, are one of the things that were a really good way for someone to show their Roman culture, their adopting of a very elite and enviable lifestyle. So you would invite your friends round, you could have a chat whilst getting changed in the cold room, you could then have a sauna. They're a bit like Turkish baths, you move through them from cold to warm to hot. You would have slaves rubbing you down with olive oil. It would be a very sort of communal and sociable idea. So perhaps when you were going around for dinner, this might be something you would do before you had your pre-prandial drinks. Now, talking about the slope, I'll show you one of the original excavation photos. And you can see here, and this is actually still visible on site, look at these steps coming down. So they've built all these baths, as I say, very cleverly using the landscape to their advantage. And the main bit of the villa, if we just go back up the steps, is over here, just off the site, out of sight. So one of the things that we think about the owner is he was quite keen to sort of show that he was able to control his landscape and tame it, if you like. Again, to give you another artist's impression, there's a fabulous model that's been created of the villa. It's actually on view in Lullingstone Castle, which is just next door to Lullingstone Roman Villa and also worth a visit. Perhaps on the same day you could combine the two. And you can see here, again, this really brings it to life, I think. You've got a little well, which was the original source of water supply, and that well is still on the site today. I noticed when I was last there, quite a few visitors seem to have thrown coins into it, obviously hoping there's some sort of magical element to it. But it was later replaced by the aqueduct that we saw in the previous picture. But again, you can see this idea of moving through the different baths. Now, when these were first installed in 180 AD, we know that the owner, whoever it was at that time, really was celebrating the water, the river that he had in front of the villa, the water that he had now brought inside, but also a very exciting addition to the villa was this. Now, again, this is one of the very old photographs from when it was first discovered. And this comes from what was originally a cellar room. So again, using the landscape, a cellar was dug under the original villa, probably originally just to store corn. But at this time, this little niche, which originally blocked off one of the entrances, was plastered over and a beautiful wall painting was created. Now, this actually is possibly my favourite thing in the whole of the villa, even more so than the mosaics. And the reason for that is I really don't think even the photographs do it justice. Of course, you can't get right up close to it on the site, but you can lean over the barriers and get quite near. And the colours today are still as vivid and beautiful as you might hope. Even though they have faded over the many years, you can still get an idea of what a glorious wall painting this would have been. Why was this here? Well, this was a cult room, we think, celebrating water deities, perhaps celebrating the water deities of the River Darent. You can just see, here's the head of the main water nymph. She's standing. She had one other nymph either side, seated. She had a beautiful blue necklace. She had bracelets. She had leaves around her head. She has water coming out from both her breasts. And this nymph on the side, you can just see here, I think, where I'm pointing, there was water flowing out an upturned jug. So the water flowing everywhere, this would have been somewhere that owners would have come and revered the deities who they would thank for the water, for feeding their cattle, for feeding them, for supplying their baths, and for giving them this beautiful villa in such a lovely location. Now, the other reason this is one of my favourite things about the villa is the story that goes with it. As often happens, even in the houses today, some later owners came into Lullingstone and decided, for whatever reason, they didn't really like this wall painting anymore. In fact, you can see by the damage here, one owner even put a shelf up. And unfortunately, that has now damaged the painting for us today. But after the shelf, someone went as far as filling it up with mortar and rubble. So when the excavators first discovered this little niche, they thought it was totally blocked up. They had no idea this painting was here. What happened is during the excavations, one day apparently there was a huge cloudburst and the whole site flooded. And of course the excavators were terrified and worried that they would find lots of damage caused by the flood. And apparently they nervously went onto site the next day, and someone spotted that this niche, where it had been all covered with mortar, was actually now crumbling away, and these wonderful nymphs were peering out at them. So I really like to think that the original owner who put these water nymphs here and almost gave them a sort of magical quality would be smiling to think, well, these nymphs have come back to bless the villa for visitors today. Now, talking of the river, when you go to the site, in fact, today when we arrive in our imaginary visit, we will pass along the River Darrant. And again, this is one of my favourite things, these beautiful Highland cattle. I've named this particular one Hamish, because they always give you such a warm welcome. And I quite often stop on the road just going along to the villa and just take in the beauty and the serenity of the surroundings. And I know that some of you have even told me you've paddled in the river at Lullingstone. Many of us have childhood memories of that. And I think it's very easy, even on a visit today, to be wowed by the environment and to think, well, of course, it's a beautiful location. Not only is it very convenient for the farming and all the facilities, but of course, it's an ideal location to build a home because it's so beautiful. And the only sort of thing that I would qualify that with is that we do also have to put ourselves in the place of whoever lived there at the time and think, are we imposing our modern views on the ancients? Would things like location, location, location have been a concept they really understood? Well, here we can fortunately turn to the Roman and the Latin literature. And in particular, one of my favourite authors, Pliny, and if you look at his letters, he talks about his villa, why he loves it so much. And one of the things he says is, I have wonderful views. And he does interestingly talk about south-facing views. Other authors, Ausonius as well, have also talked about the importance of a lovely location. So I think we're quite safe in sharing that desire with them. So let's get back to our visit. Now, as I say, we may be approaching on the river, and if we were just drawing up in our flat-bottom boat, which we believe would have been used to get here, this is the sort of view we would have been greeted with. And I think you'll agree this is a very grand and impressive facade. This is another wonderful model that's been created using very high-tech software. And I think this really gives us an idea of the grandeur of the villa. As you'll see, we would be arriving probably here on the riverbank and walking up a path to what we believe would be the front of the villa here. Now, in front of the villa, there may well have been a formal garden. We have no actual evidence of this, but we can look at other villas like Chedworth or Fishbourne. And also we did find in a kitchen pit here, seeds, cherry, plum, sloe, all sorts of evidence that they would have been planting ornamental and beautiful fruit trees. So I think that we may well be able to imagine a rather grand garden to go with this. But let's just quickly have a little peek around the back of the villa. And again, the same model shows us that lovely view over the river that I mentioned earlier. I think Pliny would have really liked that. Now, coming as we are in AD 350, one structure that would have been added is this here. And you can see this is raised up on the slope behind the villa. And this would have been visible even at ground level. I know this is a slightly aerial view, but it was built purposely to dominate the site. And sadly, this became a tomb for a very young couple, probably in their early 20s, a man and a woman. Again, we don't know who they are, probably part of the family who lived here. And in a way it's sad, but feels quite fitting. The male, the man whose skeleton was excavated here, he is still on display inside the villa today. I believe the staff have called him George. And at first I thought that wasn't a very Roman name, But then I remembered that George comes from the Greek word for farmer. So I don't know if there was any deliberate choice in that, but again, it seems quite fitting. But you can see that, again, using the landscape and using the buildings, the owner, even in death as well as in life, wanted to make a real statement. So if we go back to this view, which we've seen before, the other building that I just wanted to point out is this one. And again, imagine if we were arriving on this boat and walking up the path, the first thing we would see is this amazing structure. And it's actually a granary, a large granary, particularly large. It's been examined in comparison to other granaries, and this would have been very impressive for a villa this size. And estimates have been given about how many acres, hundreds of acres that could have been farmed and the corn stored in this granary. You'll notice, of course, it doesn't block our view as we proceed up to the front steps, nor would it block our view if we were looking out with our drinks on the veranda over the river. But nonetheless, it's there and it's very obvious. What was special about this granary was it had features that were often only found in military granaries. So you can see under these box-like constructions, there were channels where air was allowed to flow, and that would stop the corn going dry, stop it from going mouldy. It would perhaps keep the vermin away. But this is seriously high tech, so a state-of-the-art granary. So we would probably be impressed as we arrived. And again, I tried to think of putting this into a modern equivalent. And this not only looks a little bit like a granary, but I think the idea behind these is very similar. This is a tithe barn, which were around in the Middle Ages. They were buildings that the churches used to collect taxes and to show their control over the local population. So again, very imposing. Everyone would be impressed who saw these. But let's come even more up to date. Let's just say we were going around to visit a friend today. What would be the first thing we may see as we arrived? Again, as I talked about, coming up the garden path in Lullingstone. How about this? Now, I actually showed these slides to Patrick and Ben, also Archaeopress, earlier this week. And Ben was very impressed by this car and was able to tell me not only that it was a Ferrari, but also what size engine it has and what model it was. And really, that got me thinking that, of course, just like Ben enjoyed admiring this car, imagine going to Lullingstone and saying to the owner, I love your granary. What size storage capacity does it have? Isn't that the latest model that all the army bases have? And then the owner might say, well, let me give you a tour before dinner. Grab a glass of wine and we'll go and have a look at the granary. Just like today, someone might want a little spin in the car before dinner. So I'm desperate to take you inside the villa. We'll be going in very soon, but just before we do that, let's just have a look at some comparative villas who also use landscape to impress their visitors. Here's one in Gloucestershire. Again, you can see the terracing, and perhaps even more so in the next slide, which gives you an artist's impression. And I think you can really see here how impressive it would be coming down the steps here. Again, you can see the use of water. A really grand villa, perfect for entertaining. Another one that some of you may have been to is Chedworth. Look at the steep slopes all around. And in particular, this slope here was, we think, probably almost vertical. And this was where the dining rooms were. So they had wonderful views from this elevated position. Whereas this side of the villa was where we think the service, the staff would have resided or prepared dinner. This would be for those that didn't need to be impressed so much, and the most important guests would be here. But notice as well, something we're going to come back to on the inside of Lullingstone is the restricted access. And this is something that Professor Wallace Hadrill has written and studied extensively. And I really enjoyed reading his work when I was researching Lullingstone, because I think it really explains to us how the Romans, although they shared their space with a lot of other people, they did restrict access within it, and they would very carefully choreograph where their visitors went. So you see here, once you get to this courtyard, there's a block. only the special guests would be allowed through here. Now, you may have noticed that all these beautiful artist images are very sunny, they're very glorious. They really look probably more how you might imagine Italy to look than Britain, particularly on a day like the days we've been having this week. And so my last artist impression is one that I think is probably even truer to what Lullingstone would have looked like. And here it is. This is by an artist called Alan Sorrell, who did lots of amazing pictures of Roman Britain. And yes, I think a bit bleaker, a bit more drizzly. This is probably, I'm afraid, what it would have looked like on our visit tonight. Now, the weather's clearly changed, so it's definitely time for us to go inside. And before we actually go in, I'll show you the floor plan. So this is where we're arriving, coming up the staircase here. This is the veranda that I mentioned. And we're going to go in to this room, which is known as the audience chamber. And beyond that is the dining room. So just to show you the model again, which I think again brings it to life a bit better. Here we are coming up the stairs, crossing into the veranda. Have we got time perhaps to go and have a quick dip before dinner? Let's hope so. And then come back here. And this is where we're going to start. Now, this slide is actually upside down compared to the ones that I've just showed you, in that we would actually be arriving up the staircase and across the veranda here. But I've put it this way around so you can enjoy the imagery. What you see here is the audience chamber. Now, I'm talking as if we're coming for dinner because I think that would be a lovely thing to do. But I also want us to imagine the other people that would be coming in. And those would include the tenants, so tenant farmers who perhaps rented land from the Lullingstone owner. It could be people coming to get their instructions for the day, so the workers might meet the owner in this audience chamber, be told what they were going to be doing, and then go off and do their work. They may even be coming to pay their rent. So these were not necessarily sociable visits, some of them were more business. Now, interestingly, the excavators found that just off screen here, there was a plain border of red tesserae, and just here it was the most worn because it had been repaired. So we think that probably all visitors came in this way and then walked around in a clockwise way. But I wonder if some of those tenants or workers were sent back. They weren't allowed all the way around. But as we're going to be special guests, I'm going to bring us all the way around here. And I'm going to look at this beautiful mosaic. Just going back briefly, those workers, by the way, would have, if they didn't get to come round, they would have only seen two parts of this mosaic which would have been facing the correct way for them. And that would be this and this. And what are these? These are the 4 seasons surrounding this mosaic. We've got winter here in a dark cloak, so normally explaining, I guess, the darkness, the sort of unfruitful time, the time when the farm perhaps was not really reaping many crops. This might be your kind of Alan Sorrell style image, if you like. Here we have spring, a bit more hope. There's a bird on her shoulder. Now, there's a bit of debate about what was here. Do you remember I said that the deer posts, which were, when they were dug, they disturbed a mosaic? This is where we think the tesserae, the small bits of mosaic, came from. And unfortunately, we've lost this whole roundel. You might expect this to be summer because then it would go winter, spring, summer, autumn. And some scholars think that. However, others, and I'm going to include myself here, think this is summer. And I'll show you why. Because when you look at her, she's got corn coming out of her hair. And autumn is often shown with a rake. Now, whichever order those two are, autumn or summer, let's just say one has the corn, the other has the rake. What I think is really interesting is those are the only 2 images that people who were restricted, for example, the tenant farmers coming in, would have seen. And this is a way of the owner saying, my farm is successful, you're coming to pay your rent, but look what a good businessman I am. Look how well I'm doing, and how great for you to be part of this incredible business. it might be a bit like someone said to me the other day, they went to the dentist, and you know, you go to the dentist, let's just say you're going to have some big work done to your teeth, you're a bit nervous about it, but you notice the dentist has a nice car in the front of his practice. You notice that he's got all the latest equipment. You may think, thank goodness, this person who's about to be drilling in my teeth has all the latest equipment, I'm in safe hands. You may, if you're just going because you've got raging toothache and want to get out there as quickly as possible, you may not like what you see. You might think this dentist is making too much money. So of course we don't know. The tenants coming here may well have had that sort of negative reaction. Who knows whether this would sort of backfired on the owner or whether it would have encouraged them. I think these are all really interesting things for us to think about. Now, I've mentioned the four seasons, and these are a really popular theme in mosaics in Roman Britain. It may be, of course, because there are four, so they're ideal for corners. They could also represent the moving through the year, the liberality of the owner. And I'm going to show you some of my other favourite four seasons. Again, unfortunately, there are only three, though I must add that autumn is missing here, but these are from Brading Roman Villa. Again, another amazing villa, definitely worth visiting on the Isle of Wight. And let's have a look at this, a close-up of summer. She has poppies in her hair. Again, I'll show you the spring, the idea of things abounding, life beginning again. And not surprisingly, the winter in the cloak, wrapped up warm, and sadly a dead bird, just to show, as I mentioned, like at Lullingstone, this idea that not much is coming to life at this time. So let's go back to Lullingstone and focus for a moment on the scene here. And what we have is Bellerophon, a Greek hero, riding his magic horse Pegasus and killing the Chimera, a scary monster with a lion's head breathing fire, a serpent's tail, and a goat's head coming out its back. And he was a well-known Greek hero, particularly because he's described in that amazing piece of work that we know and love even today, Homer's Iliad. So in book 6, that's where we first meet Bellerophon. And I think this might have been the owner of Lullingstone saying, I know my Homer, I love it, and I want to share one of my favourite stories with you. Here it is. Now, again, there are other interpretations with Bellerophon. It could be seen as representing triumph of evil over death. It could be as simple as the owner saying, I love my hunting weekends that you, my visitors, are coming to share with me. But I don't think we can ignore the fact that this is a main character that if you knew your Iliad, you would most naturally associate, I think, with Homer. So going back to the model, I'm just going to show you again where we've come. So if we're looking at Bellerophon, we'll be standing here facing this way. Now, we in a moment are going to go into the dining room because we are privileged guests. But if I have come here as a tenant and I'm hurried out this way, wouldn't it be tempting to have a quick peek in there and see this other mosaic? Well, guess what? They built a step. Now, this is 23 centimetres high, so almost the height of a ruler. You would probably trip up if you tried to step in there and have a sneaky peek. So I think, again, this is the owner's way of saying, don't come in here unless you're invited. But we are invited, and this is what we're in for, a real treat this evening. It's an apsidal dining room. It was built, by the way, these mosaics are around 330, 360 AD. And because it's apsidal, it means it's a horseshoe shape. So we have this sort of horseshoe shaped couch, and whoever is the most important guest would go here on the right, a bit like us saying, you can sit at the head of the table to whoever you want to be the most privileged guest. And here we can perhaps imagine the owner is chatting about his mosaics and perhaps reciting some lines, which again we'll come back to in a moment. Now, apsidal dining rooms became very popular across the empire, and Here's a nice example of one that appeared on a tombstone. This is on display in the Yorkshire Museum. You can go and have a look, and we can see here Julia Velver lying in a very sort of relaxed pose, I think, leaning on her arm there. And this is, I think, the representation of her apsidal dining room. So she wanted to go out partying, if you like. So I think that's a really lovely representation. But again, let's imagine we're having our dinner here. There may have been other tables laid out in the main bit of the audience chamber, depending on how many guests there are. And again, I'm just going to show you the model so you can imagine. These curtains, by the way, we think were there because no iron hinges were found for doors. So again, this would have been another way the owner could have differentiated between his different kinds of guests. Now, the really special mosaic in the dining room that only the select few get to see is here. And it shows Europa, a princess riding on the back of a white bull. And that bull is actually Jupiter, king of the gods in disguise. And this is a very famous myth, again, going into classical mythology, which again, I think the owner is celebrating or showing off or showcasing, however you want to interpret it. But this is a story that is told in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And Jupiter disguised himself as a bull so that he could trick Europa and carry her off. And he fell in love with her, and that was his way of tricking her. And so that story may well have been recognisable to the guests who were lying around on the couch that we saw earlier. But he actually, as well as showing this beautiful cultural story, he's put up above here an inscription in Latin. And so on the left, I've put the Latin, and on the right, my suggested translation of it. If jealous Juno had seen the swimming of the bull, she would with greater justice have gone to the halls of Iolus. Juno is, of course, Jupiter's wife. She's queen of the gods. Jupiter was notorious for having all these extramarital affairs. But there's a little hint here. If Juno had known about this one as well, when she went to Iolus, and when was that, by the way? Well, we've got another classical reference. It's Virgil, book 1 of the Aeneid. Juno went to Iolus to say, please whip up a storm. He was the king, the god of the winds. Can you whip up a storm and stop Aeneas, who was trying to found a new nation, protege of Zeus? She said, can you whip up a storm and drown him and stop him fulfilling Zeus's purpose? She was really cross with Zeus at this time for various reasons. And I think this inscription is saying, if she'd known about this infidelity as well, wow, she'd have had even more reason to go and vent her fury on the god of the winds. Now, we think this was, this is the only instance we have of these lines. Unlike the pictures, the one we saw from Homer's Iliad and this one from Ovid's Metamorphoses, although this reference does allude to Virgil's Aeneid, the lines themselves are not taken from any literature that we otherwise know. So it's very possible that this was actually written or composed by the owner of Lullingstone. He's put them in to add something to the picture, and this is the sort of thing that I feel he may have been discussing with his guests at that dinner party we saw. It would have been a bit of a joke for them to talk about it, perhaps interpret it in different ways. And of course, the couch is all around here, so they would have had a perfect view whilst they were drinking their wine and eating their shellfish. Now, there is another instance of Europa and the bull. This came up in Roman Britain. This is from Keynsham. Again, it's 4th century AD. This is a different stage of the story in Ovid's Metamorphoses. No inscription, though, and that's what I think really stands out at Lullingstone. The owner there is trying to impress us with his wit and his intellect, as well as show us a beautiful picture. Just going back to Lullingstone, I wanted to just observe one thing that unfortunately you can't really see in this picture, but you can definitely see when you go to the villa itself, which is these tesserae around the edge. As you get further out, and of course these would have been covered by the couch, they get rather haphazard and look as if they've been laid almost in a rush. Now, you could say, well, they probably didn't care because it was going to be covered by furniture anyway, just like if you're having a new kitchen built, I believe they say, do you want the floor under all the kitchen cabinets? Or shall we not bother because who's going to see under there anyway? And some people have been quite critical about the poor quality of some of these aspects of the Lullingstone mosaics. And I think that's a little unfair, because I think it's entirely understandable that they would cut corners where they felt it wasn't going to be on full view. It may have been an issue of cost. These are expensive luxury goods. Perhaps the owner wanted to pay for the best mosaicist to do this bit, but his trainee was happy, or he was happy for the trainee to do the bits around the edge. And I also think it reminds us that these are not easy to create. A lot of them were made on site or by hand, tiny tesserae laid individually. And I can vouch for this because I actually went on a mosaics making day, something I can highly recommend. It's very therapeutic and great fun. It was a whole day. It was with a team of professional mosaicists, and they provided all the tesserae and all the tools. And after a whole day of hard work, I'm slightly embarrassed to say this is all I managed to produce. But I was proud of it, and it was great fun making it. And I suppose what it really made me think about was, this may not be a brilliant piece of art, but I made it, and it was my creation, and I have it now just on the desk beyond me, and I enjoy looking at it because that's something that I guess is personal to me. And I think the Lullingstone owner, if he designed, or at least asked a mosaicist to design that picture, and he wrote those lines, how proud he must have felt when his friends came round and he could say, look, here, this is my mosaic. Now, I'm conscious that we haven't got much longer. So one last thought on the Europa mosaic before we finish, which is this little cheeky, chubby Cupid. Again, one of my absolute favourite bits at Lullingstone. And I'm going to let you think about this, because some people have argued that he's actually pulling the tail of the bull to stop Jupiter carrying Europa away. And he's trying to do good and stop the rape happening. Others have said this is just a bit of playful sport. I like to think, see, he's smiling just a little bit, that he's saying, wait for me, I want to come. So I'll be interested to hear any thoughts on that. Now, again, just to bring us back to the present day, I guess another thing to think about with the dining room in particular is, what do we imagine? Because that's all we can do. We have no written evidence of what the Lullingstone owner was doing or thinking or planning when he built this just as beautiful home to show us. Let's think just for a moment about our practices, because I think one of the best things about studying classics in the ancient world is the amount of times that we think how many of these similarities there are between the way they behaved and the way we do. And oh, hello.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Sure.
I've had a report that some people have lost sound.
Oh.
I can still hear okay. Can anyone just quickly pop a message in the sound if they can also hear Caroline? Okay, thank you very much. I think it's a local problem with the sound. I'll get back in touch with the person individual. Thank you very much. Sorry, Caroline, carry on. I'll mute myself.
Oh, not at all. Oh, I'm so sorry someone has lost that. Hopefully they'll be able to watch it on the video and catch up on the bit they missed. So yes, I was just talking about the similarities between the way the Romans or the Romano-Britons, because by the way, we don't know if the person that lived in Lullingstone had come over from Italy or was just local. But even so, despite the many hundreds of years that are between us, it's really interesting, I think, to reflect on our own behaviour. And so what I did when I was first researching Lullingstone, because I spent many times walking around the village, just imagining I was visiting someone's home, a bit like I wanted us to do tonight, I would come back to my own home and look at it in a different light. And when I was researching the dining room, I remember putting all my pens down and going into my own dining room, and look what I found. Now, I have arranged these together for this particular photo, but I promise you, these are all things I've had in my dining room for many years. This is just a placemat I bought in John Lewis years ago. But this picture, some of you might recognise, is it reflects a wall painting from Pompeii. This little cat that I bought in Rome, it was from a museum. I was having a wonderful study trip in Rome. I thought that would be a nice sort of souvenir. This was from my recent trip, or not so recent now, to Braiding Roman Villa. Again, I thought, what a lovely mosaic. That will remind me of happy times in braiding. And then this I bought in Fishbourne Roman Palace. And this, I think, you can see I'm a real sucker for gift shops, by the way, but this, I think, is the most like Lullingstone because this has an inscription, if you like, Nunc est bibendum. Now, I'm a bit kinder, or the person who built this, or created this, is kinder than the Lullingstone owner in that they have translated it for us. It says, now we must drink, or how about cheers? That's what I like to think it says. And I looked at these and I thought, well, what does this say about me? And what if in 2,000 years someone excavates these and says, oh, she was a real show-off, wasn't she? Showing off her classical learning and trying to impress her guests. And that slightly horrified me because that was not at all my intention in buying these. As I say, they were happy memories. And these are things that I love to have around me. So again, maybe we should rethink the owner's motives. Was he just surrounding himself with things that he loved? I can't deny that when we have friends round for dinner, if we use these coasters, there's always a bit of chit chat, again, particularly about the Latin inscription, normally much laughter. Sometimes people say, what does it mean? It's always a good talking point. Now, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave the villa. But before we do, I'm just going to show you something. It would be remiss of me not to mention this, but I'm not going to dwell on it, because these rooms were added to the villa, or rather converted in the villa, a little later than the date that I am imagining we're there tonight, so about 380 AD. The reason I must mention these are the thing that Lullingstone is possibly most well known for. It had a house chapel. We know it was a chapel because you can just see here the wall painting of what we believe were Christians worshipping. They're facing east, and there was also an amazing wall painting of a Cairo, the Christian symbol. And again, all thanks to the excavators, these had become into thousands of fragments, and they were painstakingly put back together, and they are now on display in the British Museum, in the British Roman Britain Gallery. So, as I say, we're not going into the chapel tonight because it wasn't there in 350 AD. When it was there, by the way, I'll just show you the model, anyone that was visiting just to worship could come in this door here. This is where the house church was, and then they could leave again. So no coming in the front door, no having a sneaky peek at the wonderful mosaics. You would come to church and then leave. And on that subject, it's time for us to leave, down the steps, back to our boat waiting for us. I hope you've enjoyed your tour of the villa. I'm going to leave you with a point, again, bringing the idea of the Romans and us not being so dissimilar. Sometimes, as a Latin teacher, I've been asked, what is the point in Latin? It's the kind of, what did the Romans ever do for us? Now, I could talk for hours more about that, but I know that we must bring this to an end. But I was rather amused when, again, a couple of years ago, this was now, I was out shopping, just looking for something for my own house. And what did I stumble across? A mosaics display. These ones were even half price. You don't even have to be a Lullingstone Villa owner to buy these. So you can see we still adopt customs and enjoy aesthetics that our ancestors enjoyed all those years ago. Now, I'd just like to finish with some thanks. Again, just to reiterate my thanks to Archaeopress, and also on here, all the people, the individuals, museums and trusts who very kindly gave permission for their images to be used, and also everyone who supported me when I was first researching Lullingstone. But last, and certainly not least, I would like to say thank you to all of you. I've said it in Latin. Again, just a little nod to our Lullingstone inscription there. And I've put up here details if you would like to get in touch. I'm really looking forward to hearing some questions and answers. I see some are coming in. But if there's something that you would like to ask me after this evening or we don't manage to cover, please do get in touch. And one other thing that I just quickly point out here, the reason for putting this little logo here is that if you liked the idea of hearing about Virgil or Ovid or Homer, I do actually run reading groups. My current one, we've actually been doing it on Zoom in lockdown. We're just getting to the end of the Iliad. We had a very sort of heartbreaking book 22 reading last week. Those of you that know the Iliad will know why. But it's a reading group that if you were interested in joining, I will be starting some new ones later in the year. And I must thank Barbara Ann, who's one of the members, who was so inspired by Homer that she designed this wonderful logo for our reading group. And I felt slightly bad leaving this fourth corner blank. But then I looked at this slide and I thought, you know what? This reminds me of something. It's the Four Seasons mosaic at Lullingstone with one little corner missing. And on that note, that's my final tribute to the Lullingstone owner, who I'm sure you'll agree has been a great host tonight, and I hope you've really enjoyed exploring his home with me. And I'll now hand back to Patrick.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That's wonderful. Thanks so much. I think I've removed the spotlight for you now. That's really wonderful. It's so strange coming to an end of a talk like this and not being able to see and hear the audience, but I'm sure they will all be joining me in giving you a round of applause. That really was wonderful and really fascinating. Thank you so much. Caroline has been very modest about waving her books at you, but I don't share this modesty, so I'm going to do that for her. And I said, here they are. There's the book itself, Culture and Society at Lullingstone Roman Villa, and then also the lovely Latin lexicon. And both of these are available at 25% off for the Zoom attendees. And you should have received a discount voucher as part of your registration link. And I think I shamelessly also repeated it on the reminder email yesterday. So you can use that on our website, which is archaeopress.com. I should also say, it's also available at all good bookstores. You can get it online at the likes of waterstones.com and amazon.com and various bookstores when they are once again back open. So that's my plugging done. I'll stop doing that now. We've had some questions. Thank you very much to those who've sent in a question. I'm going to start. I'm going to ask it on his behalf. I'm going to start with a tantalising question from John Wall, who says, "Can we have the Lullingstone cat story, please?"
Of course. Yes. Actually, this is a lovely story. I think I know what he means, because I think this again reminds us that Lullingstone was someone's home. One of the great details in the excavation is some of the roof tiles that were found had the paw prints of dogs in them. So when they were building and the roof tiles were still wet cement and being set, obviously the family dog may have walked over them and left his mark that way. But the cat left another legacy. Now, I hope I'm going to get the details right. I recall that I read this in the original excavation reports. So you'll have to forgive me if I get some of the details a little bit wrong, but the basic story is this. What I didn't mention is that Lullingstone, sadly, was destroyed by fire at the beginning of the 5th century AD, and we think that's why it was finally abandoned. That's why a lot of the plaster had fallen in and collapsed a lot into the lower rooms. And do you remember the deep room that I told you about where the water nymphs were? My recollection is this, that in the deep room, so almost underground, they found a skeleton of a cat. Probably, I'm going to think, this is what I like to think, it was obviously I don't like to think of the cat being trapped there, but I like to think that the family had its own cat, probably a mouse catcher, I'm sure. But what was particularly poignant about the story, as I recall, is that the skeleton was found by a little water bowl. And because we know that the villa was burnt down at the end, someone suggested that the cat, this is where it gets sad, I'm sorry for this rather sort of full of pathos, this story, but the cat, we think, may have gone down into the cellar to try and get away from the flames, still got very hot, desperately tried to have a drink of water, and that was the last thing that the Lullingstone cat did before it finally gave up the ghost. And that's the Lullingstone cat. But I imagine it was a beautiful cat. Should we call it Felix, which means lucky in Latin, or not so lucky? Because I hope that answers the question. But as I say, of course, it's horrible to think of that happening, but I think it reminds us that this was a living, breathing home with family pets, just like we do today.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Amanda's question next. Would the design of the floor tile scenes have been available all over the Roman Empire? And were they completed by British craftsmen or artisan workers from elsewhere in the empire?
Oh, what a great question. I think it's really a two-parter, so I'll take it in both parts. But that, yes, brilliant. Thank you for asking that. So first of all, were these designs available all over the Roman Empire? Well, in short, yes. So for example, we know that the Four Seasons and Bellerophon were in other parts. Ravenna in Italy had a mosaic quite similar to that, I believe. Actually, only recently in 2017, a community archaeology dig in Boxford in England revealed another Bellerophon mosaic. That time they'd actually labelled the characters, so a bit like a cartoon strip, just in case the visitors didn't know which scene they were looking at. So yes, there were some that were almost like pattern book designs, if you like, and we do think that the mosaicists would go around with a pattern book and say, well, you can have a Virgil, or you can have a Homer, or you can have a kind of homemade one, if you like. That particular one of Europa, as I say, that seems to be unique, and certainly that combination with the inscription we haven't seen anywhere else. Going on to the second part of the question, which sort of links to that, I think, we do think there were mosaicists who would come over, the sort of the real specialists who might come over from Italy and say, well, I did this mosaic in Pompeii, or not Pompeii at that time, I'm afraid, but in Rome or Ravenna or wherever, they would say, I have done many of these before, I would like to offer you my best images, you know, I can tweak it and make it personal for you. However, my hourly rate is whatever. So if you're happy, I'll bring my assistant and he can do the bit that's going under the couch. Equally, we think that they set up schools in the south of England and trained up local tradesmen. So we don't know for sure whether the Lullingstone mosaics were made by local artists or those who'd come over from the Mediterranean, or perhaps a little bit of both.
Thank you, that's super. Honor Ridout asks, or Ridout, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, asks, did the excavations discover any food remains at Lullingstone?
Ooh, good question. Excellent question. Yes, they did. And again, I found it fascinating reading about these, trying to imagine what would we be having at dinner. They found shells, shellfish. So we know they liked oysters. We know they ate mussels. Because it was both arable and pasture land at the farm, we know they had cattle, so they probably ate beef. There were remains of pigs. They probably had pork. We also, as I mentioned, I think I might have mentioned earlier, the fruit trees. So we perhaps think that they would have eaten local fruit that they grew on the farm. And there were also, by the way, quite a few utensils, knives, forks. There are some beautiful jugs, and again, these are all on display in the villa, one with beautiful dolphin handles, a glass jug. So yes, is the sort of short answer. I hope I've given you an idea of the sorts of things that they might have eaten. And again, mixing bowls as well. So we know they would have been, a bit like pestles and mortars that we use, they would have ground up spices, and I'm sure they'd have drunk plenty of wine as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm attempting to multitask by listening and reading the questions as they're coming. So I'm going to ask Francis Shaw's question, which might the owner's guests have felt he was almost trying too hard with the mosaic and the elegiac couplet. Thinking of the Ray Chimalcio is lampoon for the nouveau riche pretensions. That's
a great question. Yeah, brilliant. So yes, this idea that there is in literature, there's evidence of some particular villa owners who kind of went OTT, as it were. I think the phrase used in question, the nouveau riche. If you make it look like you're trying too hard, if you say, well, I've read Virgil, I've read Ovid, are your guests just going to think, well, you know, you really didn't need to put that on a permanent floor? Because don't forget, these mosaics are permanent. You can't just whip them up like a carpet and roll them away at the end of the night. They are there as a permanent statement to everybody who comes in. And I think, yes, it's very possible that some of those, even his friends may have thought, he's just showing off. As I mentioned earlier as well, I think it's interesting to consider, would some of the tenants found it a little bit insulting that he was showing such conspicuous consumption, if you like. He might have been taking too much rent from them. Maybe they thought that's a bit unfair that he's spending it all on luxury goods when we're actually giving all our earnings to him. But just to return to the question, yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And the answer is, I suppose, we don't really know. But I think it's something that certainly would have been a discussion point over dinner, and you can almost imagine some of them maybe poking fun at the host and saying, you know, you're really being a little bit pretentious here. Some of them might have loved it. I suspect some of them went home and said, I want to get one like, let's call him Caecilius for argument's sake. I want a mosaic like Caecilius has got, you know, not tell him, just go home and copy the idea.
And sort of looking forward on that, this is an anonymous question. Would the Christian owner of the mosaic have possibly covered up the Europa mosaic, or is there any evidence that we know of that the religious and pagan scenes coexisted visibly?
Yes, another excellent question. This is such a huge topic, actually, the idea of the coexistence of the Christianity and the pagan practices, because we do think the evidence suggests that that cult room I mentioned, the deep room, there was still pagan cults, still pagan religions being practiced at the same time as Christianity under the chapel. So you have the deep room as a sort of the basement, pagan gods being worshipped. Right above that, Christianity, where of course you had to give up all other gods to be a true Christian. And there's this real contradiction. It's one of the things that scholars have debated and got very excited about ever since this was discovered. It's a hard one. We really don't know whether they would have sat comfortably with the mosaics. There has been some discussion, again, there's some papers that have been written about this, whether the mosaics themselves, which, as I mentioned, were installed before the Christian church arrived, were they actually already practicing Christianity at that time? Because it's been argued there are some hidden messages in those mosaics. And just to give you a tantalizing clue, one scholar, by a very complicated method, it must be said, has found the name Jesus in those letters of the if jealous Juno had blah, blah, blah. So if you're really interested in that, whoever, I can't remember who that question was from, I can give you references to those papers. But yeah, it's a very hot topic, and you'll see that I rather dodged the whole issue of that tonight, because I knew that it's such a big unanswered question, but again makes Lullingstone so fascinating. It's, we think, by the way, the only instance in the whole empire of having a church with Christianity being practiced and pagan religion being practiced underneath or together at the same time.
Beth Simons asks about the swastika motif in the entrance hall, and was this common motif, and do we know the meaning?
Oh, gosh, these questions are brilliant. Yes, thank you. Yes, it was a common motif, and yes, it has a meaning. So I'll take it, well, I think, as I say, the first part is just, yes, it was quite common. You will see it in quite a few mosaics, not only in Roman Britain, but across the empire. What did it mean? Well, again, we're trying to put evidence together and sort of just assuming or imagining, but we think that it gave some sort of solar representation, some representation of the sun. And the idea, if you look at the shape of it, it does give an almost feel of rotation. And the reason we think that, particularly at Lullingstone, is if you look where the swastikas are, so some are on, what I didn't manage to tell you, by the way, was some of the swastikas are on that sort of carpet area, the bit between the audience chamber and the dining room. Again, this is hotly debated, but I'm just going to throw in there for fun. I think that whole area is a huge game board. And I think it's an ancient version of Twister, because we know they did after dinner games. And so that's something we would have done had we had time after our dinner there tonight, moved onto the Twister board. But that's where some of the swastikas are. But there are also swastikas all around the Bellerophon mosaic in a sort of repeating pattern. And the idea there, we think, was it was to give that sort of circular motion, the idea just like the seasons of going through the year. And this again reinforces the landowner's assertion of his taming and controlling the landscape, moving through the seasons, moving through, I guess, the solar system. And therefore, sort of a prosperous landowner, a successful farmer, would want to reflect that in them. They could also arguably be apotropaic, which means warding off evil. So there could be this idea that by having those symbols there, you are keeping your house safe and keeping any evil spirits away. I should add, just briefly, to finish on this point, of course, many of us will know the swastika. I think actually the first time I probably was aware of it was learning about Nazi Germany, because of course Hitler used classics and used classical motifs as part of his propaganda. So it's a shame in a way that something was originally a sort of a very Roman symbol has slightly been tainted, as it were, in terms of its recognition through history, but the Romans did it first. That's what I'll say.
Marilyn Besford asks, would the destruction of the villa have been done by the locals on the decline of the empire, do we think?
Ooh, another great question. It's very possible. So yes, we think it probably ceased being occupied in about 420 AD. And was it Marilyn, I think, asked this question. She obviously knows her Roman history, because this is when the empire, Roman Empire was ceasing to have control. The Roman troops basically deserted Britain. A letter, we think, was written to Britain saying, you've got to look after yourself from now on. We're going to look after ourselves in Italy. The Romans left Britain. There's all sorts of political upheaval. We think that maybe, yes, it could have been destroyed on purpose. As Marilyn said, that could well have been a fire that the locals started in some sort of, revolt. It could have been an accident. One of the other things that the villa used to have, not at this time, but it used to have underfloor heating, by the way. Again, they did all this before us, of course. But we looked at other ways that they might have heated the villa, and they would have used braziers throughout the different rooms. So it could well have just been an accident. There could have been a brazier knocked over, a flame, lots of wood in the building. We sadly, we don't know. So I think that's a very possible and very viable suggestion. But I don't think there's any way we can say for sure.
Great, thank you. And I've got one more, and then we'll say our good evenings. The Philippe Enriquez asks, what kind of amphora did we find? It was found during the excavations at the villa, and do we know sort of what type they were?
Oh, Wow, another very learned question. Thank you. Yeah, lots of pottery was found actually. For those of you, if you didn't hear that, weren't sure, the question about amphoras, and amphora is a sort of a jug, I suppose, that was used in these times, and lots of pottery. So there was quite a bit of ceramic found. We found Samian ware, which is a sort of like your posh dinner service that you might go and get from Peter Jones for your wedding list or whatever. So lots of Samian pottery was found, but also other your kind of everyday china as well. Lots of that as well. Glass bottles, I mentioned there was one, in fact there were 4 with dolphin handles, which were really beautiful. So the good thing about pottery, of course, is it does tend to last, which is why we tend to find a lot of it, whereas any wooden implements would have been burnt, and iron things tend to rust. Quite a lot of it is on display. I think my favourite bit of pottery, it's not an amphora as such, but hopefully still slightly relates to the question, is there's a little mixing bowl, and it's got the shape of a bat's head on the front of it. You might think that's a slightly odd thing to put on, but again, I just think it shows a love of animals, a sort of just a cute way of decorating a bowl. I believe it's not all on display, there was so much, so quite a lot of it I think is still in store.
Thank you, Carol. I'm just going to remove your spotlight now, and just to once again thank you so much for giving us your time this evening, and for the wonderful lecture. And I really want to thank everyone who's come to view this. We're really grateful for the enthusiasm that everyone has shown this evening in the questions, in the comments that we've received, and in the run-up to the lecture. We had so many lovely messages about it. So we really are grateful. And as Caroline said, it is a bit strange not being able to see you all, but it's lovely to know that you're there, and we hope this has been an enjoyable evening. It certainly has been for me. And I just want to really thank Caroline one last time, and then I'm going to end the meeting for everyone. So I'm just going to bid everybody a very good evening. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and hopefully see you again soon.
And I'll just add to that again, thank you to Patrick, to you for hosting this evening so beautifully and presenting the questions so clearly. And thank you to Archaeopress again, and to everyone, as I say, who kindly lent images and supported us in this tonight. And a huge thank you to all of you for being here. And my final word has to be in Latin. I'm just going to say goodbye, which is Wellete. So goodbye and thank you.